Okay.
It should be now recording.
Get that over there.
Okay.
Which window we got here then? We're not actually seeing what seeing the screen.
A lovely blue background.
Yeah, that's a bit disappointing.
So while you're looking for that, I'll just welcome everyone who's joined us since the AGM or is recovering from the AGM. We're just waiting. No one's watching, David. We're just waiting for you to find your presentation.
There we go.
And here it comes. Great. So we'll move straight on. I'd just like to introduce again David Hudec, who's going to present a further instalment of his excellent Excel Nugget series. I say series because hopefully there'll be some more. He doesn't know that yet, but that's what I'm working on. So over to you, David, and thank you again.
Oh, thanks very much, Dave. Yeah, thank you to the committee for allowing me to present this third in a series. Gosh. Now, today I'd just like to look at getting some external data into a worksheet, which hopefully is going to be of interest to a lot of people. But before we do that, just a brief recap. I don't know how many of you have seen Nuggets 1 or 2, but just a brief background of my career so far. Started working off as a sales rep in the southeast of England, selling to the construction sector, sprinkler storage tanks, which were approved by the Loss Prevention Certification Board. And then that sort of role evolved into more of an estimating function and started to computerize that because it was very, very clunky and manual. Then in '91, went for the BS 5750, got that accreditation. Initially from a sales background, I was looking for uniqueness, but soon became very aware that it's a really wonderful tool to actually run a business. It really is. Getting it ingrained into the fabric of the business is the challenge, really. And then since then, obviously through the ISO 9000 loops and progress really up to the current day. And then in '95, headed up a management buyout and then sold the business in 2005. And from about 2007 till now, I've been running Practical Partners, which is loosely termed a business improvement consultancy. And there you go, sort your hats out and everything's hunky-dory. So today, still looking at the 7 quality management principles that appear in ISO 9001 in the back end. I think they're in one of the appendices, or it might be in the preamble. I can't remember exactly where it is. And really, we're looking at the evidence-based decision-making side of things with data and supporting decision-making. And nowadays, it's more data analysis and business intelligence that seems to be the buzzword. And these management principles, the quality management principles, are downloadable from the ISO website, and there's a link down there if you want to follow that. And also now the advent of the 4.0 core principles for quality, and really we're looking at the data value side of things. But there was a really interesting presentation last year, and in the Quality World publication back in August that covered Quality 4.0. I think it's well worth blowing off the dust and trying to get familiarized with that a bit more. So yeah, as I say, data value is where we're coming from. So it's in line with all of that. And there's the definition of data value as principle 3. And interestingly, 95 respondents to a survey, 95% of respondents to the survey said that it was very important. Data value is very important, and 71% said it was important. And everybody agreed it was slightly important as opposed to irrelevant. So yeah, it is the way forward. So with Nuggets 3, just recapping very briefly, Nuggets 1 and 2 involved some live demonstrations. Now I've changed that to the good old process of PDCA. I've decided this time to actually record some screenshot videos, so that's what will form the bulk of the input today. And I'm also looking at or considering that most people will have opened a CSV file in Excel, so I'll take that as read. But I want to look at more specifically setting up tables and then Microsoft Query. I was going to go off into the realms of Power Query, which is the new tool that Microsoft have pumped out with Excel, and also Power BI for data acquisition and cleaning, and then into Power Pivot. But when I looked at the presentation, having got all the videos together, it was a bit too long, I think, and most of you will have fallen asleep. So I cut it short to just being Microsoft Query, stopping at Microsoft Query. So let's go with our first little video and see how that goes.
Right, I'm just going to have a quick run through of how to set up a table in Excel. So if we start here with a very simple list, several columns in here and just a few rows, then to create this this ordinary list into a table, if we go to the Insert tab, and there's the Table button here. This is really simple. Excel automatically detects the range that it wants to convert, and it also detects that the table will have headers, and then you just click OK. And that's it, table created. It comes up with a default name up here, table 5 in this case, but you can rename that to anything you want, providing there are no spaces in the name. Obviously keep the names meaningful, otherwise you'll forget what the table contains, but for the moment we'll just keep table 5. And you can format it to whatever you want. Now some of these colors are really quite garish and horrible, but they're here on the styles tables. Some of the more simple ones are probably clearer to read, but for the moment let's just stick with the default that it comes up with. One of the beauties of using a table is that it'll automatically resize. So if we have some additional data to append to the bottom here, if we just click and drag that to the bottom, you'll notice that it's now been automatically included within the table itself. Now if this does get into a bit of a pickle, which it can do, then on the table design tab here, then there is a resize table button, which just brings up the range that it wants to call the table, and if that isn't the same size as you want, then you can always re-specify the referencing that you want to include. Right, one of the the next useful thing is to notice that there are no freeze panes or anything on this screen, but as you scroll down, you'll notice the column letters here get replaced with the table column names, which is quite a nice feature. So there's no need, if you've just got one sheet with a table in it, there's no need to freeze the panes, although I must say I still do, but that's probably a force of habit more than anything else. On this particular example, we have some dummy customer jobs with some products and a quantity and an each field. Now that's not much good. Okay, they're all quantity 1 with an each field in here, but if we wanted to extend the value out by multiplying the quantity by the unit rate, the each field, then we can just type in a new value and the table automatically extends to incorporate this. And the way to reference individual cells within a table is equals and then an open square bracket, means that you're dealing with a table, and then the @ symbol means this row. So we want to pick the quantity column, close the square brackets, and then we'll multiply that by the each column. You can either scroll down and select, press tab, and then when you press enter, it will flash fill the formula to every row in the table. So that's quite a useful little feature. Let's just reformat that to DP with commas. And another feature of the tables are that on the table design tab here, you have the option to add a total row, and if you do, then it will allow you to put a total in for each of the columns. Obviously, if it's a numeric one, then it uses sum. If it's just a simple text column, then yes, you can use sum, but it won't actually add anything up. But you can use a count, so there are 27 of those. You could add up all the eaches if you wanted to, using sum. So you can go along and you can count those, for example. So it's a very useful little tool. Now, when you want to refer to, we've seen how to refer to columns within the table itself, but let's say you wanted to refer to some columns outside the table, then you can just simply name the table first of all, table 5, so which cell do we want, or which column do we want. So I'll just start with the first one, the customer, and there's the customer code in there. And if we drag that across, you'll see obviously it's going to step across through the table. But the interesting thing is that when we get to, okay, dates are just, this hasn't been formatted as a date, but just simply put short date in there. And then what are we going to get? Right, up to the value column, which, because that was formatted as date, we copied it. It's trying to put it in as a date. So just reformat the column. And interestingly, when you spill out over the end of the here in this case the value column, it loops back to the first column again. So this will just keep repeating ad infinitum. It's interesting to note that the referencing doesn't stay absolute. So if we wanted, for example, to just take the value column, let's delete some rows, some columns here, just to demonstrate something here. So we've got here table 5 value. So to make this an absolute reference to the value column, all we have to do is wrap the value column inside a set of square brackets. So we've got, the column names have to be in square brackets anyway, but if we wrap a range within square brackets itself, then that becomes an absolute reference to value. So if we extend that across, there you go, we've got the same column being referenced. So that's the same as an absolute reference using the dollar symbols you would for a normal cell reference. I think that's really all there is to say about tables, to be honest. The reason for showing you this very briefly is that when we look at connecting to databases and they bring back some rows of data, Excel will put it in, or Microsoft Query will put it into a table. So more often than not, so it's as well, you're as well to get to grips with looking at tables. So that's it for now. Thank you.
So some points to remember about tables here, just a summary of what we discussed in the short clip there. Sensible names, the column headers will be replaced by the table headers when you scroll down. And ideally, with any table, really, you want to try and restrict values in a column to specific data types. I'm sure you've all come across instances where you want to do some, I don't know, some sort of calculation or whatever on some data that may have a date column in it or something, and somebody's put in TBA, for example, on a due date or something. That's fine for sort of human readable stuff, but it really doesn't help when you're trying to do some calculations on it, all sorts of errors, and you have to start trapping it and all that sort of thing. So just be a bit careful when you're using them, really. Obviously, you can use data validation to set rules, but yeah, just horses for courses, I think. Column filtering is set up by default, and additional columns with calculations will flash fill. Range of standard styles available, optional totals row, and the specific sort of column referencing if you want absolute as opposed to relative referencing. So Microsoft Query, this is how we get data into Excel. Now, it used to be the way to import data into Excel from databases, so anyone that's done it before is most likely to be familiar with this. It uses a technology called ODBC, or Open Database Connectivity, and is best used, and really only used, with a data source name or a DSN. It's just one of the couple of several acronyms that are used, usually TLAs, and we love a good TLA in QA, don't we? But now it's just a way to import data. It's still available from the data tab, and if you're using this is a Excel from Office 365, so it's the current version. So in the data menu option, there's a get data element, and other sources, there's Microsoft Query. So it is sort of buried, but it is still very accessible. It invokes a wizard for ease of use, and but you can launch Microsoft Query in full if you want to be a bit more adventurous with your querying. And it uses a language called SQL, or structured query language, to retrieve the data records. And so before we can do anything else, we have to go and set up a DSN. So let's see how we can do that.
Okay, we're going to talk about how to set up a DSN, or data source name. Now, there are a couple of ways to do this. Probably the easiest one is to go through into Control Panel from your Windows Control Panel, and if you get it appearing like this, it's easy enough to just change the display to small icons. And then we're looking for administrative tools, and within administrative tools there are these ODBC data source managers in here, 32-bit and 64-bit. We just choose the 64-bit for the moment, double click it, and that then pops up this ODBC data source administrator window. User DSNs are locked to the individual user, so it's best to set up a system DSN, then anyone on the computer can access it. I've got a few already set up in here, some Access ones and some SQL Server ones. So to create a new one, you just go to the Add button and you select the driver that you want to use, and this is dependent on the database you're trying to connect to. So for the moment, I'm just going to, I won't complete this because I've done it already and there's one ready to use, but just for demonstration purposes, a Microsoft Access driver. Click Finish, and we give it a name. Let's call it CQI, and we can give it a description if we want to. Now, because this is an Access database, we're looking for the database file to connect to, so we just go to Select, and then we can browse through. It's a bit clunky, this browse actually, but we can click through, and that's the database that I've set up for this this little demonstration, CQI test.acdb. If I were to click OK, it then puts it in here. The second OK will actually create the data source, but I've already created one, so I won't conclude that. So that's as simple as that. Now, the other way to do it is directly from Excel itself. So on a blank screen, for example, in the Data tab, from Get Data, we're predominantly going to be using Microsoft Query for this demonstration. The Microsoft Query now brings up all the data sources that have been set up on this computer, and there you can see the CQI ones that I've set up. But there's also this new data source option in here, which if you click OK, then a slightly different interface, but does the same thing. What name would we want to give it? And we'll just call it CQI2. Again, we select the driver that we want, and there's a few more options in here, but that's the ACDB one, MDB and ACDB. This is the modern Microsoft Access driver. Then we click Connect, and this is the similar screen. So this is where we need to select the actual database file that we're trying to get to. This test one is in here, and there we go, select it again. Okay, it's done that. And if we click OK on that, it will create the data source name. But as I say, I've already done that, so I'm not going to do it again. Right, that's it. It's quite straightforward. Some of the technicalities of connecting to SQL and other proprietary databases can be a bit awkward. And I've set up quite a few in the past with Sage and others. It's just a question of sucking it and seeing, or if you have an IT department, I'm sure they can help or even set them up for you. So good luck with that.
Right. So now we've got the data source set up. We need a quick overview, and this is very, very quick overview of SQL, or structured query language, which is a powerful querying language used to manage databases. And all database providers will have their own versions, but there is a standard called ANSI SQL. But each provider will wrap up their particular version of ANSI SQL into a database management system, or RDBMS for relational databases, or just snappily DBMS. And a DBMS will, amongst other things, include a data definition language, and this is used to create tables, alter tables, indexes, and other internal workings. But it also includes a data manipulation language, or DML, which uses a so-called CRUD methodology, which is an acronym again for creating, reading, updating, and deleting individual records in the database. We'll be looking at some very basic uses of the read aspect, or a select statement. I don't know if any of you are aware of or familiar with this, and apply it to the database that we've just seen. There's only got one table in it, so it's all very, very simple stuff. And just remember that columns in Excel are fields in a database, and rows in Excel are records. And ultimately, our select statement is going to look like this. We're going to select a list of fields separated by commas from the table in the database where certain criteria are met, and then optionally an order by list, and then a comma separated list of fields that you want to sort by. So let's see how we can do that then.
Okay, so now we're going to look at how we actually retrieve some data from a database once we've set up our DSN. So start with a blank sheet here, and now oddly enough everything resides in the data tab here, and get data. For the moment we're just going to look at a Microsoft query, which sits under the other data sources group. So in here, Microsoft query, and this is our CQI DSN that I previously set up. And if we go into here, then there's just one table in that Access database. If we click the plus button, then we can see all of the fields in that table. There are about, I don't know, 750 odd records, something like that. So it's not big by any means. So we can just select various fields and click the arrow to add them to the columns that we want in the query. Or alternatively, we can just click the table and then it adds all the fields. So as there aren't that many, let's just go for all of them for the moment. So that's the field list that we are going to be pulling across. Next, we can include some where conditions. These are the query criteria, if you like. So for any of these, we could select some filters that we want on the customer, on the job number, part number, etc. Standard sort of querying or filtering criteria, really. But let's just keep that blank for the moment, just so we can pull everything across. And then we can sort by any one of the columns. Incidentally, a sort by column can only be used if it appears in the original list. So you can't sort by a column that isn't included, basically. And so we're not going to sort it by anything, and we're going to return the data to Microsoft Excel and click Finish. Excel is going to suggest cell A1, and it's going to pop it into a table. Well, there are other options in here, but for this purpose we're going to look at tables. So click OK, and bang, there is the data. So interestingly, formats can be a bit odd straight from a database. So one of the first things you might need to do, as in this case, is to just reformat. I'll leave that one as it is. Reformat some of the columns. Typically dates and times. As you can see, there's a time field here, but it hasn't really pulled across a time. And if we actually format that as a time, you'll see they're all 00, which is midnight. But come on to how to deal with oddities like that, and this seems to be a feature of Access itself. And perhaps the each field, so Shift Control 1, that just pre-formats it to 2dp and 1000 separator, or comma separator for the thousands. And there we have it. There's our data pulled across. If we just Control and down arrow, 480 rows. That's all. So not big by any means.
Okay, so now we're going to look at how we can improve this a little bit more.
So one of the other features of putting it into a table is the appearance of these filter boxes, which are set by or included by default. As you can see on the date field, it just splits it out into the various months, and we can drill down further if you want to using the tree view here. But what I want to do is look at how to filter the data using the query itself rather than filtering it from the resultant table. The main purposes of doing that, or reasons for doing that, are that you can reduce the number of rows returned. Now obviously these database queries can get quite large, or the number of rows can get quite large, and Excel has a capability to store just over 1,048,000 rows, which if you're interested is 2 to the power of 20. But it's quite a big number for ordinary purposes, but in database terms it really isn't that much at all. So the more we can filter out, the better it'll be. So just looking at some the status column, if we start with that, we'll see in this filter, and it neatly sorts it alphabetically as well, there are quite a few different status stages in the process for this particular data. So if we wanted to just find out what those fields actually, what those fields are, and if we come outside the table, then we can use our old friends sort and unique, and we're going to use the table query from CQI DSN. That's a nice snappy little name. And I'm going to have status. So we'll choose the status column, and we close the unique, close the sort, and there you go. So that is a list of all the unique occurrences of the status field. Before we go any further, let's just look at renaming that table. And there's the table name up here. So well, let's just call it CQI table. Okay, and in here, then because obviously it's Excel, it's renamed it in the formula as well. So we can now use this. I just want to copy and paste that over here, just the values, so we knock out the formula. And now we've just got a list. We'll come on to this, and you'll see the purposes of this in a bit. So that is linked to the query, and now this is just a copy of the various status values. So now how to filter this? We just insert, let's insert a couple of rows at the top here. And then in the status column, we want to say, for example, look at data. Just set up this data validation for a minute in this particular cell. If we have a list, and the source will be that. Okay, so over here we can now pick from a list. what it is. But of course, this cell isn't linked to the data yet. Now, just to build that up very briefly, when we go to, sorry, I'll start that again. We right-click in the table, then we've got these options that appear. There's refresh, that'll just refresh the data, and obviously nothing's changed. And we also have, under the table option here, we have these two, which are quite useful to know about. The external data properties. Let's have a quick look in here first of all. So properties for this particular table mean that every time it's refreshed, it's going to adjust the column widths. I don't know if you saw when I refreshed it just now, the columns jumped. So we can turn that off because, well, it's personal preference, but I just don't like things jumping around all over the place when you refresh it. It can be confusing. So we'll do that. And now if we expand that field out, random and refresh, the column widths stay the same. Also in properties, there's a little button to the next to the connection section with the name of the connection in here, and this is these are some settings that you can use to determine how to automatically refresh the query. So you can put it every minute whenever you're opening the file, and then on the data tab there is a refresh all up here, and this determines whether this query should be included in the refresh all or not. So under definition, this is where it starts to get a little bit more meaningful, if you like. Just pull it out a bit so you can see everything that's going on. First of all, we have the connection string. So this was generated by using the DSN, and then the DSN actually adds this other spurious stuff which you don't really need. I can delete it, but it will, unfortunately, it will add it back in. But that's really not too much of an issue. But here we have, looking back at the select statement itself, this is the command text as it's known. The select and then the field list, so that's every field in the table, and then the table we're selecting it from, and we don't need the path to there, but that's the table name. Now the reason it's put two instances of the table name in there is because you can use aliases, so you can rename tables if you want to in the query, and there are a number of good reasons for doing that, but let's just ignore it for the moment. It's a little bit more of an advanced topic, so not today's business probably. And there is an absence of a where clause. That's because we pulled everything down from the database. So just OK that, and then the next one I want to look at in this is the edit query. Because we generated this query using the query wizard, when we edit the query, it will pop the query wizard back up, and then we can just skip through again. And now this time, if we just say status equals approved, so these are all jobs that have obviously been approved. Next, and just skip through the rest of them, and there it is. There's the filter coming through direct from the query. So if we go back in and have a look in the properties, in the box here under the definition, we'll see it's added in a line here where the status equals approved, which is exactly what we typed in. And you'll see it has added the rest of the stuff back in, and it's also added the path to the table. But it's not critical. It works, but it's not really necessary. So one of the key things to remember with these queries is you can actually link those criteria. So where it says status equals approved, we can actually link that approved rather than having to type it in each time. We can link it to a cell. Let's see how we do that then. So over here, we go into table and we edit the query. Now, the value that we want to provide, rather than being status equals approved, which is a hard-coded, if you like, typed-in value, we want to use something called a parameter. So the way we can access some parameters is to cancel out of here, Now, because we're in the wizard, it's now asking if we want to continue editing in Microsoft Query. So we'll say yes, and it opens up. This is Microsoft Query itself. So this is the underlying program that has maximized those tables. And we can just expand this range down here, and that is the table that we've just queried with all of the fields in it. And these are the criteria that we've applied through the wizard. If the criteria section isn't visible, then on view you just click criteria, because sometimes if you haven't got any criteria specified, as we didn't have, then that's how it would appear. So if you want to switch it on, just come in here, view the criteria. So rather than status equals approved, which is a hard-coded value, as I say, we're going to use square brackets. Now the convention is to use an @ symbol, not to be confused with the @ symbol that is used in table cell referencing. This is specific to SQL and is a bit of a convention. So if we're going to use our parameters, we might as well use the convention. So we're going to call it @status. These buttons at the top here, that means query now. So when we click it, because we've added this parameter, it's now asking us for a value for the parameter. So if we say approved, then lo and behold, it's going to use that approved value in the status column. To return to Excel, we click this little button up here, return data, ping back into here, and nothing has changed because we didn't actually change the value of the status column in the search criteria. So if we want to do that, to link it to that cell, so under the table, there is no, because we've used a parameter in the query, Microsoft Query has detected that and has allowed us to come into this parameters section. There's the name of our parameter. So its default is to use just a prompt string where we actually typed approved in, or you can use a value that you type in, or you can just link it to that cell and optionally refresh the query automatically every time the value in that cell changes. So we just click OK. Now the cell value hasn't changed, that's why the query didn't change, but now if we do dispatched, there are all the dispatched records returned from the query. Come back to approved, and there are the approved ones. So it's a different kind of filtering. Obviously the table filtering is very useful if you've only got a small number of rows, but if you've got anything specifically that you want to look at, I don't know, ad hoc or whatever, then by all means use the parameters to do that. You can also this field here is a date created range, so you could put a date in there saying from the 1st of January to the 31st of January, for example, and use that search criteria or those search criteria only to pull back the records for orders that were placed in January or February or March, and again set it up. So we're going to whiz through how to do that. So first of all, we need a start date, 22, and let's just insert another row just to keep it nicely separated. Now this time we're going to use the EO month, end of month formula. We're going to pin it to that one, and 0 months, i.e. end of the current month, or the month from the source date, and that's it. We'll call this from, call that to, and just push those across. Now because that is a formula, that is a typed in value, we can use our cell styles here. So the input box is that, and the calculation is that, so that we don't inadvertently overtype the formula. Okay, I know you can lock the cells, but it's just a visual cue. So we're going to go back in here, and we're going to come back into edit the query. Now this time, because we have a parameter, it says that the query cannot be edited by the query wizard, so we have to go into Microsoft Query. So we click OK, and Microsoft Query has popped up. and there's our original parameter. So if we delete that, now we're looking to look at the created field, and we're going to say it's greater than or equal to at date from. Now it's going to ask me for a date, so we're going to do 01/01/2022. Now this happens sometimes with dates that it cannot, hence the reason for using it as an example. A, it's very, very useful, and B, you do come across this sometimes. Dates are notoriously difficult with databases and stuff. They're always a problem. I don't know why. So it's saying there's an invalid character. So we just say OK for the moment, cancel that out, and return. When we come back to the query here, we can come into our parameters, and there's our at date from. You'll notice the at approved has disappeared. So we're now going to get that from that cell, and everything seems to work reasonably okay. So we just change that to, let's say, March. There we go, created in March only. And to check that, you can look at the filter, or after the 1st of March rather, not only, and there's some April dates in there, but obviously January and February are missing. So to repeat that exercise to specify a date range, we just need to add the 2 value into here. So just to repeat the exercise, go back into table, edit the query, cannot be edited in the query wizard, come back in here, and get our created date, put it in here, and less than or equal to, this time at, I used date from, so date to. Okay, and return, cancel. Right, now this time it's now asking for the parameter value, and we're going to use that cell. Because the first cell is set to automatically refresh, we don't need to refresh it when this one changes as well. So now we should have just March. So that's how to specify an inclusive date range. So if we change that to April, we've got the 1st to 30th of April, and there we have 1st to 30th of April. And we can add in our value in here, which was, if you recall, so that equals at quantity times at each, wrong brackets, yes, okay, spot the deliberate mistake. And there's our extended value, and we can just easily do sum, and it's CQI table, and we want the value field from that. Close the sum, and there we go, 156. So change this to start with January. January was quite a good month by the looks of things, and so these criteria can be very, very handy. Obviously, this is just an input cell at the moment. It could be a drop-down list of Jan, Feb, March, April, etc. So we can then string together the start date using the date function in Excel, rather than just long-handed or long-winded typing of 01/01/22 or whatever. So that might be a bit easier in a similar way to what we did down on this drop-down list here. But other than that, that's how to create parameter-based queries. Very, very powerful. Now you may recall that when I showed you the template as to what the select statement would look like, we included, or there was included, an order by clause. Just to show you how that can be added. So far we've seen the query wizard, we've seen Microsoft Query itself, but also if we come back into properties here and select our or get to our select statement here, we can actually type in some SQL code if we know what we're typing in. So in this case, it's just going to be order by, and then it's just a comma delimited list of fields to order by. So I'm just going to take the created field there and append it on there. And if you have more than one, obviously, as I say, comma separated, and it will sort or order them by the sequence in which they appear here. So if we do that and OK, then you'll see it jumps around, and now we're in the date created, sorted by date created. And we come back to January, 5th of January, 6th, 7th, etc. So that's how to add some SQL manually.
Right, so in summary, we can use the query wizard just to add very simple queries. Drag and drop is very, very easy to use. Microsoft Query itself is more complex, and you can join 2 or more tables as well, and you can also obviously add the parameters as we've seen. Or if you know what you're doing, you can go to the command text box and actually type in the SQL text yourself. Once you're familiar with SQL, then you can do that. So I've finished query. I've removed all the spurious stuff. So there's the select part with a list of fields. The from part is the table, and then the where part is the 2 parameters in there, where the created is greater than or equal to and less than or equal to, and we've sorted it by date created as well. Just a quick note that the question marker is the placeholder for the parameters in the where clause. There is another condition we could have put in instead of the greater than, equal to, and less than equal to. That's the between statement, and that follows the format of date created is between question mark and question mark. So we could have reused those 2 parameters in that construct. And there are a lot more useful ones. In particular, searching wildcards in text is often quite useful, where you use wildcard characters like star or % or whatever the format is for the particular flavor of SQL you're dealing with. So now the fun starts. So data imported from a database is usually reliable and clean because a lot of effort is spent developing systems and designing systems to ensure data integrity. Otherwise, the systems will just keep falling over. However, in the real world, life isn't like that. And data comes in a variety of formats and a variety of states of cleanliness as well. Excel files, lists and tables in Excel files. So we mentioned earlier about the TBA in a column that's supposed to have dates in it, for example. That can cause all sorts of grief. Databases won't allow you to do that, but you can have it in real life examples. And also you've got text files, CSV, as we mentioned earlier, and then there's other formatted text files like XML and JSON. You can also scrape data from websites, and there are many other data sources available. So just a few here. For example, the file type sources, as you can link data directly from a workbook. Text here as a CSV. There's the XML and JSON, even PDF, or you can link files from a folder. That's always very useful as well. So if you've got a group of, say, a batch of CSV files that come in regularly, you stuff them in a folder, and you can set the query up to actually read every single file and import it. So it's a very powerful tool. And then obviously from databases, we've got SQL Server, Access, and various other ones as well. So we've got all these sources, and they pump into this thing called Power Query. Now, we're not going to have time today to go into Power Query, I'm afraid, But Power Query, lo and behold, uses its own language. It's called M. I think M stands for mashup, presumably sort of West Coast American or sort of American-based sort of terminology. But data mashup is the way it's used, and it's used to clean and to sense check the data before it's imported into anything that actually uses it, something like Excel or wherever. And it's a macro recorder. And once you're in Power Query, you can either load the data straight into Excel, as we have done with Microsoft Query, or you can load it to some other destinations, or you can just transform the data in Power Query itself using its editor. And that is the import data box that pops up when you load to from Power Query, very similar to the one we saw when we were initially setting up the query in using the query wizard. And at the bottom of that list, there's this little tick box here that allows you to send the data to what's known as the data model within Excel itself, and that is a whole new technology called Power Pivot. And that again has its own language called DAX, and DAX stands for Data Analysis Expressions. And this is a language that's much more similar to Excel. Uses a set of functions and formulae to model the data and prepare it for reporting. But again, we won't have time, I'm afraid, to go into that today. So some homework for you if you're interested. Learn SQL. There's a lot of stuff online. Microsoft have some really useful help pages on this, but focus on the select statement, because at the end of the day, we're going to be reading data. We're not necessarily going to be creating it, updating it, or deleting it. Certainly not. If your in-house database administrators could hear me speaking, they'd have kittens. But focus on the from clause in particular. This is where you can join two or more tables. And to do that effectively, you really need to understand the structure of the database to see which tables need to be related to which. Sometimes it's fairly obvious, but other times, I don't know, database designers have their own way of working sometimes, and it's not always obvious. And sometimes the data has to be structured in a particular way to solve a particular problem as well. So yeah, just be aware that it's not always that straightforward. And then using the where clause, this is where it's really powerful. In particular, say wildcard searches and things are very useful on text-based columns. And learn DAX. This is very useful in Power Pivot and also Power BI, which seems to be flavour of the month at the moment. And the good thing about DAX is, as I said, it's the formulae are very similar to Excel formulae, but that does have some other really useful things embedded in it. In particular, things called date tables, which are really powerful and allow you to do some, or to lever some DAX formulae that manage summing over parallel periods of time and all the rest of it, and also measures. So measures are equivalent really to the old pivot table calculated item or calculated field values rather than calculated columns, but again, we won't have time to look at that. And familiarize yourself with M. That's the language in Power Query, and also because Power Query is the data cleansing arm of Power BI, it also has very useful benefits in if you're ever going to look at Power BI. A lot to do, but in the words of Geoffrey Chaucer, it's a life so short and a craft so long to learn. I'm afraid that's always been the way. But in the words of William Shakespeare, to work that we love, we rise betime and go to it with delight. So once you start enjoying yourself, you have a great time. But if you master it, then we can be heroes forever and ever. There's David Bowie for you. So if you enjoyed it, please tell your friends and colleagues. If you didn't, please tell me. And if you have been affected by any of the issues raised in this presentation, then please do call me. And that, I think, concludes the presentation. Back to you in the studio, as it were.
Oh, thank you very much. Leave the last slide on in case people want to make it. Excellent. I knew you'd get a David Bowie somewhere.
3 out of 3.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was excellent. I like the mix between presentation and pre-prepared. Any questions, anyone? There's some typing going on. Okay. More elite thought was excellent. Thank you, David. It was. There's so much there, isn't there? I think we'll have to play the video back a couple of times, I think.
Yeah, I'd say the original one was well over an hour, and I thought, oh God, that's really not going to work.
Well, no, I thought that was really good. Thank you very much. That's right. Yeah, the plaudits come to the CQI and the complaints go to David. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Power BI, current flavour of the month. Were you hinting that it's days there's something better coming along, or is it just that's the way we're doing things?
I speaking to other people who in sort of this sort of data analysis field, Microsoft seem to have a mission to make Power BI one of the modeling tools, and they keep talking about insights, data insights, because a lot of companies have got so much. You really need to crunch it and analyze it properly to get meaningful information out of it. There's a big difference between data and information, and it's just a really good tool for presenting information. It's also a good revenue stream for them, it has to be said, because it is a per user per month basis, whereas Excel Excel is as well, but most people have Excel already, so this is a bit of an upsell from Microsoft, but it is extremely powerful.
Mike says thank you very much for the presentation, which was very informative and helpful, as does Malcolm. And Michael continues by saying Excel is so powerful and there's always something new.
Oh, yeah, always.
How often are new functionalities being added to it?
Yeah, sporadically. There is the latest one is a function called Lambda, which is really powerful. It allows you to basically write your own custom functions in the user interface without going into VBA or macros or anything. So that's a really powerful. Look that up.
Okay, does anyone else have any comments, questions? Please unmute if you'd like to ask David directly.
I'd just say thank you, David. I'm blown away really by it all. It's as Dave said, yeah, I think I'm going to have to watch the video back a few times to actually get to grips with it. I guess it's one of those things, if you don't practice and use it regularly, then you'll forget it. So yeah, better pick it up and get running with it, I think.
Yeah, it's always like, getting the links into the database is the biggest challenge, actually. And it can be sort of political in some instances, but normally it's fine. But you may have people can be very silo based and very protective, so you've got to be a bit careful sometimes.
Okay, any last questions or comments? If not, we'll wrap up in a minute. Thank you again for everyone for coming.
Sorry, I was on mute. I was going to ask a question if I can.
Yes, please, far away.
Sorry, my fault, pressing the wrong button. Our corporate databases are not owned by us, they're owned by the vendor. And so I would have an immediate caution because they can change that database structure at a whim, and the meaning and context of any of the data in it can change whenever they feel like it.
Mm.
And of course, this is not a maintained interface. So we prefer to work with our vendors to create the reports we want. That way they get maintained as part of the maintenance package of the software.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
I'm just sort of throwing a little thought of caution here, because you're getting into effectively a software development program with configuration management, test, and all the rest of it that should also be wrapped around it.
yeah. If you've got a bespoke system, effectively yourself, I don't know if it is a bespoke system.
It's
Then
one that's provided by the vendor, who they supply
Yeah.
the product, and they can do whatever they like with it.
they can, and often they do, but they also very often build in backwards compatibility. So this is coming back sometimes to the concept of understanding the structure of the database. Quite often you find that extra tables are added to a database to add extra functionality, but the original tables remain, but they're just linked again. So a lot of it's keeping abreast of what those changes are. But yeah, if you've got it tightly controlled, which often happens actually, then yeah, you will probably have to go through them and ask for reports. But often those reports can be A, automated, and B, sent to you in either in Excel format directly, or in CSV or some other format that you can then load into a folder and do your automatic updates from there. So there are ways to slicken it, if you like, but that depends on the relationship that you have with the vendor, really.
I completely agree. I'm just observing.
Yeah, it does happen. A lot of the stuff
the data source is something that's not necessarily under your control.
Exactly.
And you can get very subtle changes occur in the meaning of fields in the database. And I would, based on my experience, I'm not so sure that the legacy or the older tables still exist. Sometimes things get moved into a new way of doing things. And if you're starting to get into complexity here, we have a policy of having had our fingers burnt, we have a policy of preferring to get these things created by the vendors.
Mm-hmm.
And then we hang our Excel front end onto something that the vendor is paid to maintain to do a particular job with the specification.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's obviously appropriate in that particular instance. But I mentioned earlier on that I've done quite a lot of connections into looking at Sage accounts in particular, and they have a backwards compatibility option because they have so many users out there that use this sort of technology that they can't afford to let it drop. But yeah, if you're dealing with someone who's a bit more I don't know, a bit more protective, let's say, about their structures, then they're not necessarily going to release it that freely. And the only option you have, really, as you say, to get them to write the reports and then use the reports that they provide. That way, you're protected against the changes, and you can actually lever those changes as well.
Anyway, it's a word of caution.
Yeah.
I have seen Excel spreadsheets that are producing completely wrong answers because people haven't noticed subtle little changes that are occurring.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Yeah, that's garbage in, garbage out. Often the case, isn't it? Yeah.
I think it's more that Excel spreadsheets can become very complicated, and people don't realise dependencies they've got in them, and things that have changed, and they gradually diverge away from what they thought they were doing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that does happen. Yeah, I'm afraid. No, good point. Good point.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you very much. Okay, if there's nothing else, I will thank David for his time and his presentation. That was really good. Thank you, David. Hang on at the end if you don't mind, and Tom and Billy. Thank you, everyone. That's it for this week and this month, and we'll see you very shortly with another evening event. We will try and publicise a little bit more in advance, so apologies for being a little late this time. Anyway, we'll see you next time. Thank you for your time. Good night.
Yes, thank you very much.